The story of today is Uncle Tom's Cabin of Harriet Beecher Stowe.
Contents. Chapter 1, in which the reader is introduced to a man of humanity. Chapter 2, the mother. Chapter 3, the husband and father. Chapter 4, an evening in Uncle Tom's cabin. Chapter 5, showing the feelings of living property on changing owners. Chapter 6, discovery. Chapter 7, the mother's struggle. Chapter 8, Eliza's escape. Chapter 9, in which it appears that a senator is but a man. And finally the chapter 10, the property is carried off.
Chapter 1, in which the reader is introduced to a man of humanity. Late in the afternoon of a chilly day in February, two gentlemen were sitting alone over their wine, in a well-furnished dining parlor, in the town of P, in Kentucky. There were no servants present, and the gentlemen, with chairs closely approaching, seemed to be discussing some subject with great earnestness. For convenience sake, we have said, hitherto, two gentlemen. One of the parties, however, when critically examined, did not seem, strictly speaking, to come under the species. He was a short, thick-set man, with coarse, commonplace features, and that swaggering air of pretension which marks a low man who is trying to elbow his way upward in the world. He was much overdressed, in a gaudy vest of many colors, a blue neckerchief, bedraped gaily with yellow spots, and arranged with a flaunting tie, quite in keeping with the general air of the man. His hands, large and coarse, were plentifully bedecked with rings, and he wore a heavy gold watch chain, with a bundle of seals of portentous size, and a great variety of colors, attached to it, which, in the ardor of conversation, he was in the habit of flourishing and jingling with evident satisfaction. His conversation was in free and easy defiance of Murray's grammar, and was garnished at convenient intervals with various profane expressions, which not even the desire to be graphic in our account shall induce us to transcribe. His companion, Mr. Shelby, had the appearance of a gentleman, and the arrangements of the house, and the general air of the housekeeping, indicated easy, and even opulent circumstances. As we before stated, the two were in the midst of an earnest conversation. "That is the way I should arrange the matter," said Mr. Shelby. "I can't make trade that way, I positively can't." "Mr. Shelby," said the other, holding up a glass of wine between his eye and the light. "Why, the fact is, Haley, Tom is an uncommon fellow. He is certainly worth that sum anywhere, steady, honest, capable, manages my whole farm like a clock." "You mean honest, as niggers go?" said Haley, helping himself to a glass of brandy. "No, I mean, really, Tom is a good, steady, sensible, pious fellow. He got religion at a camp meeting 4 years ago, and I believe he really did get it. I've trusted him since then, with everything I have, money, house, horses, and let him come and go round the country, and I always found him true and square in everything." "Some folks don't believe there is pious nigger, Shelby," said Haley, with a candid flourish of his hand. "But I do. I had a fellow, now, in this year last lot I took to Orleans minus. He was as good as a meetin'. Now, really, to hear that critter pray, and he was quite gentle and quiet like. He fetched me a good sum, too, for I bought him cheap of a man that was 'bliged to sell out, so I realized 600 on him. Yes, I consider religion a valuable thing in a nigger, when it's the genuine article, and no mistake." "Well, Tom's got the real article, if ever a fellow had," rejoined the other. "Why, last fall, I let him go to Cincinnati alone, to do business for me, and bring home $500. 'Tom,' says I to him, 'I trust you, because I think you're a Christian. I know you wouldn't cheat.' Tom comes back, sure enough, I knew he would. 'Some low fellows, they say,' said to him Tom, 'why don't you make tracks for Canada?' Ah, master trusted me, and I couldn't, minus they told me about it. I am sorry to part with Tom, I must say. You ought to let him cover the whole balance of the debt, and you would, Haley, if you had any conscience. Well, You've got just as much conscience as any man in business can afford to keep just a little, you know, to swear by, as T were, said the trader, jocularly, and then, I'm ready to do anything in reason to oblige friends. But this year, you see, is a little too hard on a fellow, a little too hard. The trader sighed contemplatively, and poured out some more brandy. Well, then, Haley, how will you trade? Said Mr. Shelby, after an uneasy interval of silence. Well, haven't you a boy or gal that you could throw in with Tom? Minus none that I could well spare. To tell the truth, it's only hard necessity makes me willing to sell it all. I don't like parting with any of my hands. That's a fact. Here the door opened, and a small quadroon boy, between 4 and 5 years of age, entered the room. There was something in his appearance remarkably beautiful and engaging. His black hair, fine as floss silk, hung in glossy curls about his round, dimpled face, while a pair of large dark eyes, full of fire and softness, looked out from beneath the rich, long lashes, as he peered curiously into the apartment. A gay robe of scarlet and yellow plaid, carefully made and neatly fitted, set off to advantage the dark and rich style of his beauty, and a certain comic air of assurance, blended with bashfulness, showed that he had been not unused to being petted and noticed by his master. "Hello, Jim Crow," said Mr. Shelby, whistling, and snapping a bunch of raisins towards him. "Pick that up. Now." The child scampered, with all his little strength, after the prize, while his master laughed. "Come here." The child came up, and the master patted the curly head, and chucked him under the chin. "Now, Jim, show this gentleman how you can dance and sing." The boy commenced one of those wild, grotesque songs common among the Negroes, in a rich, clear voice, accompanying his singing with many comic evolutions of the hands, feet, and whole body, all in perfect time to the music. "Bravo," said Haley, throwing him a quarter of an orange. "Now, Jim, walk like old Uncle Cudjoe, when he has the rheumatism," said his master. Instantly the flexible limbs of the child assumed the appearance of deformity and distortion, as, with his back humped up, and his master's stick in his hand, he hobbled about the room, his childish face drawn into a doleful pucker, and spitting from right to left, in imitation of an old man. Both gentlemen laughed uproariously. "Now, Jim," said his master, "show us how old Elder Robbins leads the psalm." The boy drew his chubby face down to a formidable length, and commenced toning a psalm tune through his nose, with imperturbable gravity. "Hurrah! Bravo! What a young un," said Haley. "That chap's a case, I'll promise. Tell you what," said he, suddenly clapping his hand on Mr. Shelby's shoulder, "fling in that chap, and I'll settle the business, I will. Come, now, if that ain't doing the thing up about the rightest." At this moment, the door was pushed gently open, and a young quadroon woman, apparently about 25, entered the room. There needed only a glance from the child to her, to identify her as its mother. There was the same rich, full, dark eye, with its long lashes, the same ripples of silky black hair. The brown of her complexion gave way on the cheek to a perceptible flush, which deepened as she saw the gaze of the strange man fixed upon her in bold and undisguised admiration. Her dress was of the neatest possible fit, and set off to advantage her finely molded shape. A delicately formed hand and a trim foot and ankle were items of appearance that did not escape the quick eye of the trader, well used to run up at a glance the points of a fine female article. "Well, Eliza," said her master, as she stopped and looked hesitatingly at him. "I was looking for Harry, please, sir," and the boy bounded toward her, showing his spoils, which he had gathered in the skirt of his robe. "Well, take him away then," said Mr. Shelby, and hastily she withdrew, carrying the child on her arm. "By Jupiter," said the trader, turning to him in admiration, "there's an article. Now, you might make your fortune on that gal in Orleans, any day. I've seen over 1,000, in my day, paid down for gals not a bit handsomer. I don't want to make my fortune on her," said Mr. Shelby, dryly, and, seeking to turn the conversation, he uncorked a bottle of fresh wine, and asked his companion's opinion of it. Capital. Sir, first chop, said the trader, then turning and slapping his hand familiarly on Shelby's shoulder, he added, minus. Come, how will you trade about the gal? Minus what shall I say for her, what'll you take? Mr. Haley, she is not to be sold, said Shelby. My wife would not part with her for her weight in gold. Women always say such things, 'cause they han't no sort of calculation. Just show 'em how many watches, feathers, and trinkets one's weight in gold would buy, and that alters the case, I reckon. I tell you, Haley, this must not be spoken of. I say no, and I mean no, said Shelby, decidedly. Well, you will let me have the boy, though, said the trader. You must own I've come down pretty handsomely for him. What on earth can you want with the child? Said Shelby. Why, I've got a friend that's going into this your branch of the business, wants to buy up handsome boys to raise for the market. Fancy articles entirely sell for waiters, and so on, to rich uns that can pay for handsome uns. It sets off one of your great places, a real handsome boy to open door, wait, and tend. They fetch a good sum, and this little devil is such a comical, musical concern. He's just the article. I would rather not sell him, said Mr. Shelby, thoughtfully. The fact is, sir, I'm a humane man, and I hate to take the boy from his mother, sir. Oh, you do? Minus law. Yes, something of that natter. I understand perfectly. It is mighty unpleasant getting on with women. Sometimes. I lays hates these your screamin' times. They are mighty unpleasant. But, as I manages business, I generally avoids 'em, sir. Now, what if you get the girl off for a day, or a week, or so? Then the thing's done quietly all over before she comes home. Your wife might get her some earrings, or a new gown, or some such truck, to make up with her. I'm afraid not. Lord bless ye, yes. These critters ain't like white folks. You know, they gets over things. Only manage right. Now, they say, said Haley, assuming a candid and confidential air, that this kind of trade is hardening to the feelings. But I never found it so. Fact is, I never could do things up the way some fellers manage the business. I've seen 'em as would pull a woman's child out of her arms, and set him up to sell, and she screechin' like mad all the time. Very bad policy damages the article makes. Am quite unfit for service sometimes. I knew a real handsome gal once, in Orleans, as was entirely ruined by this sort of handling. The fellow that was trading for her didn't want her baby, and she was one of your real high sort. When her blood was up, I tell you, she squeezed up her child in her arms, and talked, and went on real awful. It kinder makes my blood run cold to think of. And when they carried off the child, and locked her up, she just went ravin' mad, and died in a week. Clear waste, sir, of $1,000, just for want of management. There's where he is. It's always best to do the humane thing, sir. That's been my experience. And the trader leaned back in his chair, and folded his arm, with an air of virtuous decision, apparently considering himself a second Wilberforce. The subject appeared to interest the gentleman deeply, for while Mr. Shelby was thoughtfully peeling an orange, Haley broke out afresh, with becoming diffidence, but as if actually driven by the force of truth to say a few words more. It don't look well, now, for a feller to be praisin' himself, but I say it just because it's the truth. I believe him reckoned to bring in about the finest droves of niggers that is brought in, at least. I've been told so. If I have once, I reckon I have 100 times all in good case, fat and likely, and I lose as few as any man in the business. And I lays it all to my management, sir, and humanity, sir, I may say, is the great pillar of my management. Mr. Shelby did not know what to say, and so he said, indeed. Now, I've been laughed at for my notions, sir, and I've been talked to. They ain't poplar, and they ain't common, but I stuck to 'em, sir. I've stuck to 'em, and realized well on 'em. Yes, sir, they have paid their passage, I may say, and the trader laughed at his joke. There was something so piquant and original in these elucidations of humanity that Mr. Shelby could not help laughing in company. Perhaps you laugh too, dear reader, but you know humanity comes out in a variety of strange forms nowadays, and there is no end to the odd things that humane people will say and do. Mr. Shelby's laugh encouraged the trader to proceed. It's strange.
Chapter
Now,
4.
but I
An
never could
evening
beat
in
this
Uncle
into people's
Tom's
heads.
cabin.
Now,
The cabin
there was
of
Tom
Uncle
Loader,
Tom was
my
a
old
small
partner,
log building,
down in Natchez.
close
He
adjoining
was a
to the
clever
house,
fellow.
as
Tom
the Negro
was
par
only the
excellence
very devil with
designates his
niggers on
master's
principle.
dwelling.
He was,
In front
you
it had
see,
a neat
for a
garden patch,
better-hearted feller never
where,
broke bread.
every
He
summer,
was his system.
strawberries,
Sir, I used to
raspberries,
talk to Tom.
and a variety
Why,
of fruits
Tom,
and
I used
vegetables
to say, when
flourished
your
under
gals takes
careful
on and
tending.
cry,
The
what's the
whole
use
front
of
of it was
cracking
covered
on
by a
them
large
over the
scarlet
head,
begonia
and
and a native
on
multiflora
and round.
rose,
It's
which,
ridiculous,
and
says
twisting
I,
and
and
interlacing,
don't do no sort
left
of
scarce a
good.
vestige
Why,
of the rough
I
logs
don't
to
see
be
no
seen.
harm in their crying,
Here,
says
also,
I. It's
in
natter,
summer,
says I,
various
and if
brilliant
natter can
annuals,
blow off one way,
such as
it will another.
marigolds,
Besides,
petunias,
Tom,
four
says I,
oaklocks,
it
found
just
an
spoils your
indulgent
gals.
corner in
They get
which to
sickly,
unfold their
and down in the
splendors,
mouth,
and
and
were the
sometimes they
delight
get
and
ugly,
pride of
particular
Aunt Chloe's
yellow
heart.
gals do, and it's
Let
the
us
devil and
enter
all
the
getting
dwelling.
on
The
and
evening
broken.
meal at the
Now,
house is
says
over,
I, why
and
can't
Aunt
you
Chloe,
kinder cooks
who presided
up
over
and
its
speak
preparation
him
as
fair?
head cook,
Depend on
has
it,
left to
Tom,
inferior
a little
officers in the
humanity
kitchen the
thrown
business
in
of
along
clearing away
goes a
and
heap further
washing
than all your
dishes,
jawing
and
and
come out
cracking,
into her
and
own
it pays
snug
better,
territories,
says I.
to get her
Depend on
old man's
tea.
supper.
But Tom couldn't
Therefore,
get the hang on
doubt not
tea,
that it is
and
her
he
you see
spiled
by
so
the
many for
fire,
me that I
presiding
had to
with
break off with
anxious
him,
interest
though
over
he was a
certain
good-hearted
frizzling
fellow,
items in a
and as
stew
fair a
pan,
business hand
and
as is
now
going.
with grave
And do you find your
consideration
ways of
lifting the
managing the
cover of a
business
bake
better than
kettle,
Tom's?
from
Said
whence
Mr.
steam
Shelby.
forth indubitable
Why,
intimations of
sir,
something
I
good.
may say
The
so.
round,
You see,
black,
when I anyways
shining
can,
face is
I take
hers,
so little care
so
about the
glossy as to
unpleasant parts,
suggest the idea
like
that
selling
she
young'uns
might
and
have
that
been
get the
washed
gals out
over
of the
with
way, out
white
of sight,
eggs,
out of
like
mind.
one of her
You know,
own
and
tea
when it's
rusks.
clean done,
Her
and
whole
can't
plump
be helped,
countenance
they
beams with
naturally gets used to
satisfaction
it.
and
Can't,
contentment
you
from
know,
under her
as if it was
well-starched
white
checked
folks
turban,
that's brought
bearing
up in
on
the
it,
way of
however,
spectin'
if
to
we
keep
must
their children
confess
and
it,
wives,
a little
and all
of that
that.
tinge of
Niggers, you know,
self-consciousness which
that's
becomes
fetched
the
up
first
properly.
cook of the
Ah,
neighborhood,
and no
as
kind
Aunt
of
Chloe was
expectations of
universally
no
held
kind.
and
So all
acknowledged
these
to be.
things comes
A
easier.
cook she
I'm
certainly
afraid mine
was,
are not
in the
properly
very
brought
bone
up.
and center
Then,
of her
said
soul,
Mr. Shelby,
not a chicken or
suppose not.
turkey or
You
duck in the
Kentucky
barnyard,
folks
but
pile your
looked
niggers.
grave when
You
they
mean well
saw
by
her approaching,
him, but
and seemed
can't no
evidently
real
to be
kindness
reflecting on
arter
their
all.
latter end,
Now, a
and
nigger,
certain it
you
was
see,
that she was
what's got to
always
be hacked and
meditating
tumbled
on
round the
trussing,
world,
stuffing
and sold
and
to
roasting,
Tom, and
to a
Dick,
degree
and the
that
Lord
was
knows who.
calculated to
Can't no
inspire
kindness to
terror
be
in any
given on
reflecting
him
foul
notions and
living. Her
expectations,
corn
and
cake,
bringin'
in
on
all
him
its
up to well,
varieties of
for
hoe
the rough
cake,
and tumble comes all the
gutters,
harder on him
muffins,
arter.
and
Now,
other
I
species
venture
too
to say,
numerous to
your
mention,
niggers would be
was
quite
a
chop
sublime
fallen in a
mystery
place
to
where some
all
of your
less
plantation
practised
niggers would be
compounders,
singing and whooping
and
like
she
all
would
possessed.
shake her fat
Every
sides
man,
with
you
honest
know,
pride and
Mr.
merriment,
Shelby,
as she
naturally
would
thinks
narrate
well
the
of his own
fruitless
ways,
efforts
and
that
I
one
think I
and
treat
another of
niggers
her
just about
compeers
as
had
well as
made
it's ever
to attain
worthwhile
to
to
her
treat
elevation.
him.
The
It's a happy
arrival
thing
of
to be
company at the
satisfied,
house,
said
the
Mr.
arranging
Shelby,
of
with
dinners
a
and
slight shrug,
suppers,
and
in
some
style,
perceptible feelings
awoke
of a
all the
disagreeable
energies of
nature.
her soul,
Well,
and
said
no
Haley,
sight was more
after they had
welcome to
both
her than
silently
a
picked
pile
their
of
nuts for a
traveling
season.
trunks
What do you
launched on
say?
the
We'll
veranda,
think the
for
matter
then
over,
she
and
foresaw
talk with
fresh
my
efforts
wife,
and fresh
said Mr. Shelby.
triumphs. Just
Meantime,
at present,
Haley, if you want
however,
the matter
Aunt
carried on in
Chloe
the
is
quiet way
looking
you
into
speak
the
of,
bake pan,
you'd best not
in
let
which
your business in
congenial
this neighborhood
operation
be
we
known.
shall leave
It
her
will get
till
out
we
among my
finish our
boys,
picture
and
of
it
the
will not be
cottage.
a
In
particularly
one corner
quiet
of it
business
stood a
getting
bed,
away any of my
covered
fellows.
neatly with a
If they
snowy
know it,
spread,
I'll
and
promise
by
you,
the side of it was a
certainly,
piece of
by all
carpeting,
means,
of some
Mum,
considerable
of course.
size.
But I'll
On
tell
this
you,
piece of
I'm in a devil of
carpeting
a hurry,
Aunt Chloe took
and
her
shall want to
stand,
know,
as
as soon
being
as possible,
decidedly in the
what I
upper
may
walks
depend
of
on,
life,
said he,
and it and the
rising
bed
and
by
putting
which
on
it
his
lay,
overcoat.
and the
Well,
whole corner.
call up this
In
evening,
fact,
between 6
treated
and
with
7,
distinguished
and you shall have my
consideration,
answer,
and
said
made,
Mr.
so
Shelby.
far as
And the trader
possible,
bowed himself out of the
sacred from the
apartment and
marauding
like to have
inroads
been
and
able to kick the fellow
desecrations of
down the
little
steps.
folks.
Said he
In
to
fact,
himself,
That
as he saw
corner
the
was
door
the
fairly
drawing room
closed,
of the
with his
establishment.
impudent assurance.
In the other
But he
corner
knows how
was a
much
bed
he
of
has me
much
at
humbler
advantage.
pretensions,
If anybody had
and
ever said to
evidently
me that I should
designed
sell
for
Tom
use.
down south
The
to one
wall
of those
over the
rascally traders,
fireplace was
I should
adorned
have
with
said,
some very
"Is thy
brilliant
servant a dog,
scriptural prints,
that he should do this
and
thing?"
a portrait
And
of
now it
General
must come,
Washington,
for aught I
drawn
see,
and
and
colored in a
Eliza's
manner
child,
which would
too.
certainly have
I know that I
astonished
shall
that
have some
hero,
fuss with wife
if
about
ever
that,
he happened
and,
to meet with
for that
its
matter,
like. On
about
the rough
Tom,
bench in
too.
the corner,
So much
a
for being
couple
in
of
that hey-ho.
woolly-headed
The
boys,
fellow sees
with
his
glistening
advantage,
black
and
eyes
means
and
to
fat
push it.
shining cheeks,
Perhaps the
were
mildest form
busy
of the
in
system of
superintending
slavery
the
is to be
first
seen in the
walking
state of
operations
Kentucky.
of the
The
baby,
general prevalence
which,
of
as is
agricultural
usually
pursuits of
the
a quiet
case,
and gradual
consisted
nature,
in getting
not
up on
requiring
its
those
feet,
periodic seasons
balancing
of
a
hurry and
moment,
pressure that
and
are
then
called for in the
tumbling down
business of
each
more southern
successive failure
districts,
being
makes the
violently
task of the
jeered
Negro a more
as
healthful and
something
reasonable
decidedly
one,
clever.
while the
The
master,
table,
content
somewhat
with a more
rheumatic in
gradual
its
style of
limbs,
acquisition,
was
has
drawn
not
out in
those
front of the
temptations to
fire, and
hard-heartedness which
covered
always
with a
overcome
cloth,
frail human nature
displaying
when the
cups and
prospect of sudden
saucers
and
of a
rapid gain is
decidedly
weighed in the
brilliant
balance,
pattern,
with no
with
heavier
other
counterpoise
symptoms
than
of
the
an
interests of
approaching
the
meal.
helpless and
At this
unprotected.
table was
Whoever
seated
visits
Uncle
some
Tom,
estates there,
Mr.
and
Shelby's
witnesses the
best
good-humored
hand,
indulgence
who,
of some masters
as he
and
is to be
mistresses,
the hero
and
of
the
our
affectionate
story,
loyalty of
we
some
must
slaves,
daguerreotype
might be
for our
tempted to dream
readers.
the
He
oft-fabled
was a
poetic
large,
legend of a patriarchal
broad-chested,
institution,
powerfully
and all
made
that.
man,
But over
of a
and
full
above the scene
glossy
there broods
black,
a portentous
and a
shadow, the
face
shadow
whose
of law.
truly African
So long as the
features
law
were
considers all these
characterized by
human
an
beings,
expression
with
of
beating
grave
hearts
and
and
steady
living
good
affections,
sense,
only
united
so
with
many
much
things
kindliness
belonging to
and
a master, so
benevolence.
long as the
There
failure,
was something
or
about his
misfortune,
whole air
or imprudence,
self-respecting
or
and
death of the
dignified,
kindest owner,
yet
may
united
cause them
with a
any day to
confiding and
exchange a
humble
life of kind
simplicity.
protection and
He was very
indulgence for one
busily
of hopeless
intent at
misery
this
and toil,
moment
so
on
long
a
it is
slate lying
impossible to
before
make
him,
anything
on
beautiful
which
or
he was
desirable in the
carefully
best
and slowly
regulated
endeavoring
administration
to
of slavery.
accomplish a copy
Mr.
of
Shelby
some
was a
letters,
fair average
in
kind
which
of man,
operation he was
good-natured and
overlooked
kindly,
by young
and
Master
disposed to
George,
easy
a
indulgence of
smart,
those around him,
bright boy
and
of
there had never
13,
been a lack
who
of
appeared
anything which
fully
might
to
contribute
realize
to
the
the
dignity
physical
of his
comfort of the
position
Negroes
as
on his
instructor.
estate.
Not
He had,
that way,
however,
Uncle Tom, not
speculated
that
largely
way,
and quite
said
loosely,
he,
had involved
briskly,
himself
as
deeply,
Uncle Tom
and his notes to a
laboriously
large
brought up
amount
the
had come
tail
into
of
the
his
hands
G
of
the
Haley,
wrong side
and
out.
this small piece of
That makes
information is the key to the preceding conversation. Now,
sakes.
it had
Now,
so happened that,
does it?
in approaching
Said
the
Uncle
door,
Tom,
Eliza had caught
looking
enough
with
of
a
the conversation to know that a
admiring
trader was
air,
making
as
offers
his
to her
young
master
teacher
for somebody.
flishingly
She
scrawled
would gladly have stopped at
innumerable
the door
for
to
his
listen,
edification,
as she came out,
and then,
but her mistress
taking
just
the
then
pencil
calling,
in his big,
she was obliged
heavy
to
fingers,
hasten away.
he
Still she
patiently
thought she heard
recommenced,
the trader make an
"How
offer
easy
for her
white
boy, could
folks
she
all
be
use does
mistaken?
things,"
Her heart swelled
said
and
Aunt
crooked,
Chloe,
and she
pausing
involuntarily
while she
strained
was
him so
greasing
tight
a
that the
griddle
little
with a
fellow
scrap
looked up
of
into her
bacon on
face in
her fork,
astonishment.
and
"Eliza,
regarding young Master
girl,
George
what
with
ails you
pride,
today?"
"The
said her
way he
mistress,
can write,
when Eliza
now,
had upset the
and
wash
read,
pitcher,
too,
knocked down the
and
workstand,
then to come out
and
here
finally was
evenings and read
abstractedly
his
offering
lessons
her
to
mistress
us.
a
It's
long
mighty
nightgown in
interesting,
place of the silk
but,
dress she had
Aunt
ordered her to
Chloe,
bring from the
in
wardrobe."
getting mighty hungry,
Eliza started.
said
"Oh,
George,
Missus,"
"isn't that
she
cake
said,
in the skillet
raising her
almost
eyes.
done?"
Then,
"Most done,
bursting into
Master
tears,
George,"
she sat down in a
said
chair,
Aunt Chloe,
and began
lifting
sobbing.
the lid and
"Why,
peeping in
Eliza,
minus browning
child,
beautiful,
what
a
ails
real
you?"
lovely
said her
brown.
mistress.
"Ah,
"Oh,
let me
Missus,
alone for that,
Missus,"
Mrs.
said
Let
Eliza,
Sally try
"there's
to
been a
make some
trader
cake,
talking with master in the
other
parlor.
day,
I heard him.
just to larn
Well,
her,"
silly
she
child.
said. "Oh,
Suppose there
go
has.
away,
Oh,
Missus,"
Missus, do
said
you
I,
suppose
"it
Masra
really
would sell
hurts
my
my
Harry?"
feelings.
And the poor
Now,
creature threw
to see
herself
good
into a
victuals
chair,
spilt
and
that our
sobbed
way,
convulsively.
cake risks
"Sell
all to
him.
one side,
No,
no
you
shape at
foolish
all.
girl.
No
You know
more
your
than
master
my
never
shoe.
deals with
Go
those southern
away."
traders,
And with this
and never
final
means to sell
expression
any of
of
his
contempt
servants,
for
as
Sally's
long as they
greenness,
behave well.
Aunt Chloe
Why,
whipped the
you
cover
silly
off the
child,
baked kettle,
who do you think
and
would want to
disclosed
buy
to
your
view a
Harry?
neatly
Do you
baked
think
pound
all the
cake,
world are set
of
on him
which
as
no
you are?
city
You
confectioner
goosey.
need to have
Come,
been
cheer
ashamed.
up. And
This
hook
being
my dress.
evidently the
There now.
central point
Put
of
my
the
back hair up in
entertainment,
that pretty braid you
Flirty
learned the other
began
day.
now to
And
bustle
don't
about
go listening
earnestly
at doors
in the
anymore.
supper department.
Well, but,
Here you,
Mrs.
Mose
You
and
never
Pete,
would give your
get
consent
out the
to.
way, you niggers.
Nonsense.
Get away.
Child. To
Polly,
be sure,
honey,
I
Mammy'll
should.
give her baby
What do
some
you talk
fin
so for?
by and
I would
by.
as soon have one
Now,
of my own children
Nazra
so.
George,
But really,
you just take
Eliza,
off them
you are
boots
getting
and
altogether
sit
too
down
proud of
now
that
with
little
my
fellow.
old man,
A man can't
and
put
he'll
his
take
nose
up
into
the
the door.
sausages,
But you think he
and
must
have
be
the
coming
first
to buy
griddle
him.
full of
Reassured
cakes
by
on
her
your
mistress'
plates in less
confident
than no
tone,
time.
Eliza
They
proceeded
wanted me
nimbly
to
and
come to
adroitly with
supper
her
in the
toilet,
house,
laughing
said
at her own
George,
fears.
but
As
I
she
knew
proceeded,
what was what too
Mrs.
well
Shelby
for
was
that.
a woman of high
And
class,
Chloe,
both
so you did,
intellectually
so
and
you did.
morally.
honey,
that natural
said Aunt
magnanimity
Chloe,
and generosity of
keeping the
mind which
smoking
one often
batter
marks as
cakes on his
characteristic
plate.
of the women of
You know
Kentucky.
your old
She added
auntie
high
keep
moral
the
and
best for
religious
you.
sensibility and
Let
principle,
you alone
carried
for
out
that.
with great energy and ability into
And
practical
with
results.
that, Auntie
Her
gave
husband,
George a
who
nudge
made no
with her
professions
finger,
to any particular
designed to be
religious
immensely
character,
facetious,
nevertheless
and
reverenced and
turned again
respected
to
the
her griddle with
consistency of
great
hers, and
briskness.
stood,
Now for the
perhaps,
cake,
a little
said
in awe of her
Masr
opinion.
George.
Certain it
When
was
the
that he gave her
activity of the
unlimited
griddle
scope in all her
department had
benevolent
somewhat
efforts for the
subsided,
comfort,
and
instruction,
with that,
and
the
improvement of her
youngster
servants,
flourished a large
though he
knife
never took
over
any
the
decided
article in
part in them
question.
himself.
La
In
bless
fact,
you,
if not
Masr
exactly a
George,
believer in the
said
doctrine
Aunt
of the
Chloe,
efficiency of the
with
extra good
earnestness,
works of saints,
catching his
he really
arm.
seemed
You
somehow
wouldn't
or
be
other to
for
fancy
cutting.
that his wife
It
had
would
piety
that our
and
great
benevolence
heavy
enough
knife
for to indulge a
smash all
shadowy
down spile
expectation
all
of
the
getting
pretty
into
rise
heaven
of
through
it.
her
Here,
superabundance of
I've
qualities
got a
to
thin
which he
old
made no
knife.
particular
I keeps
pretension.
sharp a
The
purpose.
heaviest load on his
Darnell,
mind, after his
comes
conversation with
apart
the
light
trader,
as a feather.
lay in the
Now
foreseen
eat
necessity
away,
of
you
breaking to
won't
his
get
wife the
anything to
arrangement
beat that arm.
contemplated meeting the
Tom Lincoln
importunities
says,
and opposition
said
which he knew he
George,
should have reason to
speaking with his
encounter.
mouth full,
Mrs. Shelby,
that there
being
Ginny is
entirely
a better
ignorant
cook
of her
than you.
husband's
Them
embarrassments,
Lincolns
and
and
knowing
much
only the
count.
general
No
kindliness
way,
of his temper,
said Aunt
had been
Chloe,
quite sincere in the entire
contemptuously.
incredulity
I
with
mean,
which she had met
set
Eliza's
alongside our
suspicions.
folks.
In fact,
They,
she dismissed
yes,
the matter from her
respectable
mind,
folks enough
without
in
a
a
second
kinder
thought,
plain way,
and being
but
occupied in
as to
preparations
get
for an evening
of
visit,
anything in
it passed
style,
out of her thoughts
they
entirely.
don't begin to have
Chapter
a
2,
notion on
The Mother.
tea.
Eliza had
Said
been brought
Masr
up by her
Lincoln.
mistress,
Now,
from girlhood,
alongside
as a
Masr
petted and
Shelby.
indulged
Good
favorite.
lord.
The
And
traveler in the
Mrs.
South
Lincoln,
must
can
often
she
have
kinder
remarked that
sweep it
peculiar
into
air
a
of
room like
refinement,
my missus,
that
so
softness
kinder
of voice
splendid?
and manner,
Yer no.
which seems
Oh,
in many
go
cases
way
to be a
don't.
particular
Tell
gift to
me
the quadroon
nothing
and mulatto
of them
women.
Lincolns.
These natural
Minus
graces in the
Aunt Chloe
quadroon are
tossed
often
her head
united
as
with
one
beauty
who
of the
hoped
most
she did
dazzling
know
kind,
something of the
and in
world.
almost every
Well,
case with a personal
though,
appearance
if heard you
prepossessing and
say,
agreeable.
said
Eliza,
George,
such
that
as we have
Ginny was a
described
pretty
her,
fair cook.
is not a fancy
So I
sketch,
did,
but
said
taken
Aunt
from
Chloe, minus
remembrance,
I may
as
say
we saw
that.
her,
Good,
years ago,
plain,
in Kentucky,
common cooking.
safe under the
Ginny'll
protecting
do
care
make
of her
a good
mistress.
pone.
Eliza
Bread
had reached
bile her
maturity
taters for
without
her
those
corn
temptations
cakes
which
isn't
make
extra.
beauty so fatal
Not
an
extra
inheritance
now.
to a slave.
Ginny's corn
She had been
cakes
married to a
isn't.
bright and
But
talented
then
young
he's
mulatto
far
man,
but,
who was
Lord,
a slave on a
come to
neighboring
the higher
estate, and
branches.
bore the name of
And
George
what can
Harris.
she do?
This young man
Why,
had been hired
she
out by
makes
his
pies
master to
sartin
work in
she
a bagging
does.
factory,
But what
where
kinder
his
crust?
adroitness and
Can
ingenuity
she
caused
make
him
you a
to be
real
considered the
flecky
first hand
paste,
in the place.
as melts
He
in
had
your
invented a
mouth,
machine for the
and lies
cleaning of the
all up
hem,
like a puff?
which,
Now,
considering the
I went
education
over
and
thar when Miss
circumstances
Mary
of the
was
inventor,
gwine to be married,
displayed quite as
and
much
Ginny, she
mechanical
just
genius as
showed me
Whitney's
the
cotton
wedding
gin. He
pies.
was possessed of a
Ginny
handsome
and I
person
is
and
good
pleasing
friends.
manners,
You
and
know,
was a general
I never
favorite in the
said nothing.
factory.
But go
Nevertheless, as
long,
this young man was
Masr
in the eye of the
George.
law not a man,
Why, I
but a
shouldn't
thing,
sleep a
all
wink
these
for a
superior
week if I
qualifications were
had a
subject
batch
to the
of pies
control of a
like
vulgar,
them are. Why,
narrow-minded,
they want
tyrannical
no
master.
count.
This same
Tea all.
gentleman,
I
having
suppose
heard of
Ginny
the fame of
thought they
George's
were ever so
invention,
nice,
took a ride over
said
to the
George.
factory
Thought
to see
so.
what this
Minus
intelligent
didn't
chattel had
she?
been about.
Thar she
He was
was,
received with great
showing him,
enthusiasm by
as
the employer,
innocent you see.
who
It's
congratulated
just
him on
here.
possessing
Ginny
so
don't
valuable a slave.
know.
He was
Lord,
waited upon
the
over the
family and
factory,
nothing.
shown the
She
machinery by
can't be
George,
expected to
who,
know.
in high
Tant no
spirits,
fault of
talked so
him.
fluently,
Ah,
held
Masr
himself so
George,
erect,
you
looked
doesn't
so
know half
handsome
your
and
privileges
manly,
in your
that his
family
master
and
began to
bringin'
feel an
up.
uneasy
Here
consciousness
Aunt
of
Chloe
inferiority.
sighed,
What
and
business
rolled
had
up
his
her
slave
eyes
to be
with
marching
emotion.
round the
I'm
country,
sure,
inventing
Aunt
machines,
Chloe,
and
I
holding up
understand
his
my
head
pie
among
and pudding
gentlemen? He'd
privileges,
soon put a stop
said
to it.
George.
He'd take
Ask
him back,
Tom Lincoln
and
if
put
I
him to
don't
hoeing
crow
and
over
digging,
him
and see
every
if he'd
time
step
I meet
about
him.
so smart.
Aunt Chloe sat
Accordingly,
back in her
the
chair
manufacturer
and
and all hands
indulged in a
concerned were
hearty guffaw
astounded
of
when he
laughter
suddenly demanded
at this
George's wages,
witticism of young
and
Miss
announced his
Artis,
intention of
laughing
taking him
till the
home.
tears rolled
But
down her
Mr.
black,
Harris
shining
remonstrated
cheeks,
the
and
manufacturer,
varying ending the
Is this
exercise
rather
with
sudden?
playfully
What if
slapping
it
and
is?
poking
Minus
Maz or
is the man
Georgie,
mine.
and
We would
telling
be
him to
willing,
go away,
sir,
and
to
that he
increase
was
the
the
rate of
case that he was
compensation.
fit to
No
kill her,
object at all,
and that he
sir.
certain
I
would
don't
kill
need to
her
hire any
one
of my
of these
hands out,
days.
unless
And
if mine too.
between each of
But,
these sanguinary
sir, he seems
predictions,
peculiarly
going
adapted
off
to this
into a
business.
laugh,
Dare
each
say he may
longer
be.
and stronger
Never
than
was
the
much
other,
adapted to
till
anything
George
that I
really
set him
began
about.
to think
He'll
that
be
he was a
bound.
very
But only
dangerously
think
witty
of his
fellow,
inventing this
and
machine,
that it became him
interposed
to
one
be
of the
careful
workmen,
how he
rather
talked as
unluckily.
funny as he
Oh
could.
yes,
And
minus a
so you
machine for
telled
saving
Tom,
work,
did
is
ye?
it? He
O
can
Lord,
vent that.
what
He'll be
young uns
bound.
will be up
Let a
to.
nigger alone
Ye
for
crowed
that.
over
Any
Tom.
time.
O Lord,
They are all labor-saving
George,
machines
if
themselves.
you would
Every
make a
one of
Hornbug laugh.
No,
Yes,
he shall
said
tram.
George. I
George had
says
stood
to
like
him,
one
Tom,
transfixed.
you
At
ought
hearing
to
his
see
doom
some
thus
of
suddenly
close
pronounced by a
pies.
power that he
Fear
knew
the
was
right sort,
irresistible.
says
He
I.
folded his
Pity.
arms,
No,
tightly pressed in
Tom
his
couldn't,
lips, but a
said
whole
Aunt
volcano
Chloe,
of bitter
on whose
feelings burned in
benevolent
his
heart
bosom,
the idea
and
of
sent
Tom's
streams of
benighted
fire through
condition
his
seemed
veins.
to make a
He breathed
strong
short,
impression.
and his
Ye
large
oughter
dark eyes
just
flashed
ask
like
him
live
here to
coals,
dinner.
and he
Some
might
of
have broken out
these
into some
times,
dangerous
Mas or
ebullition,
George,
had not the
she
kindly
added, it would
manufacturer
look
touched
quite
him on
pretty
the arm,
of ye.
and said,
Ye know,
in a low
Mas
tone,
or George,
"Give way,
ye oughtn't
George.
feel,
Go with him
both
for the
nobody,
present.
on
We'll try to help
count
you."
your
Yet,
privileges.
the
'Cause
tyrant
all
observed
our
the whisper,
privileges is
and
chin to
conjectured
us.
its
We
import,
ought
though
allays
he could
to
not hear what was
remember
said,
that,
and he
said
inwardly
Aunt Chloe,
strengthened himself in
looking
his
quite
determination
serious.
to keep the power
Well,
he possessed
I
over
mean
his
to ask
victim.
Tom here,
George was taken
someday
home,
next
and
week,
put to the meanest
said
drudgery
George,
of the farm.
and you do
He
your
had been able
prettiest,
to repress
Aunt
every
Chloe,
disrespectful
and
word,
we'll make
but
him
the
stare.
flashing eye, the
Won't we
gloomy
make
and
him
troubled
eat
brow,
so he
were
won't
part
get
of a
over it
natural
for a
language that
fortnight?
could not be
Yes,
repressed indubitable
yes,
signs,
Sardin,
which
said
showed
Aunt
too plainly
Chloe,
that the man could
delighted.
not become a
You'll
thing.
see.
It was
Lord,
during the happy
to think
period of
of
his
some of our
employment in the
dinners.
factory that
Your
George
mind
had
that
seen and
our
married
great
his
chicken
wife.
pie I
During
made
that
when we
period,
gave
being
the
much
dinner to
trusted
General
and favored by
Knox,
his
I
employer,
and
he had free
Mrs.
liberty to
We
come
come
and go at
pretty near
discretion.
quarreling
The
about
marriage
that
was
our
highly
crust.
approved of by
What
Mrs.
does
Shelby,
get into
who,
ladies
with a little
sometimes?
womanly
I don't
complacency
know,
in
but
matchmaking, felt pleased
sometimes,
to unite her
when a
handsome
body has
favorite
the
with one of
heaviest
her own
kind
class
of
who seemed in every way
responsibility
suited to
on
her,
him,
and so they were
as
married
ye
in her
may say,
mistress'
and
great
is all
parlor,
kinder,
and her mistress
serious,
herself adorned
and
the bride's
taken up.
beautiful hair with
They
orange
takes that our
blossoms,
time to
and
be
threw
hangin'
over it the bridal
round
veil,
and kinder
which certainly
interferin'.
could scarce have
Now,
rested on a fairer
Mrs.
head,
She
and there was
wanted
no
me to
lack
do
of
this
white
way,
gloves,
and
and
she
cake and
wanted me
wine
to
of
do
admiring
that way,
guests to praise the
and
bride's beauty,
finally,
and her
I
mistress'
got kinder
indulgence
sarcy,
and
and
liberality. For
says
a
I,
year or two
now,
Eliza saw her husband
Mrs., do
frequently,
just look
and there
at
was
them
nothing to
beautiful
interrupt
white
their
hands so
happiness,
yorn
except
with
the
long
loss of two
fingers,
infant
and
children,
all a
to whom
sparkling
she
with
was
rings,
passionately attached,
like my
and
white
whom she
lilies
mourned
when
with
de
a grief
dew
so intense as
on
to call for
him.
gentle
And look
remonstrance
at
from
my
her
great
mistress,
black
who
stumpin'
sought,
hands.
with maternal
And what did
anxiety,
mother
to
say?
direct her
Said
naturally
George.
passionate feelings
Say,
within the bounds
minus
of reason
why,
and religion.
she kinder
After the
larfed
birth
in
of
her
little
eyes
Harry,
dem great
however,
handsome eyes
she had gradually become
and,
tranquilized and
says
settled,
she,
and
well,
every bleeding
and
tie and
Chloe,
throbbing nerve,
I think you
once
are
more
about in
entwined
the
with
right
that
on
little life,
T,
seemed to
says
become
she,
sound and
and
healthful,
she went off
and
in
Eliza
the
was a
parlor.
happy woman up
She
to the
oughter
time that her
cracked me
husband
over
was
the
rudely
head
torn
for
from
being
his kind
so
employer,
sarcy,
and brought
but
under the
dar's
iron
war,
sway of his
T
legal
is I
owner.
can't
The
do nothing
manufacturer,
with
true
ladies
to
in
his
the
word,
kitchen.
visited
Well,
Mr. Harris a
you
week or
made
two
out
after
well
George
with
had
that
been
dinner.
taken
I
away,
remember
when,
everybody said
as he
so,
hoped, the
said
heat of the
George.
occasion had passed away,
And
and
want
tried
I
every
behind
possible
the dinin',
inducement to let him
minus
to
room
restore him
door
to
dat
his former
very day,
employment.
and
You
didn't I
needn't
see
trouble
the
yourself
general
to talk
pass
any
his plate
longer,
3 times
said
for
he,
some more dat
doggedly.
bury
I
pie,
know my own
minus
business,
and,
sir.
says
I
he,
did not
you
presume
must
to
have an
interfere with it,
uncommon cook,
sir. I
Mrs.
only
Shelby.
thought that you might
Lord,
think it for
I
your
was fit
interest
to
to let
split
your man to us
myself,
on the terms
and the
proposed.
general,
Oh,
he
I
knows what
understand the matter
cooking
well enough.
is,
I saw
said
your
Aunt
winking and
Chloe,
whispering,
drawing
the day I
herself
took
up
him
with
out of
an
the
air.
factory,
Very
but you
nice
don't
man,
come it over
the
me that way.
general.
It's
He
a free
comes of one
country,
of the
sir.
very
The
fustest
man's
families
mine,
in old
and I do what I
Virginia.
please with him,
He knows
that's it.
what's what.
And so fell
Now,
George's last
as
hope.
well as
Nothing
I do
before
the
him but a
general.
life of toil
You
and
see,
drudgery,
there's
rendered more
pints
bitter
in
by
all
every little
pies,
smarting
Mas or
vexation and
George,
indignity which
but can't
tyrannical
everybody
ingenuity could
knows what
devise.
they
A
is,
very
or
humane
as
jurist
orter
once
be.
said,
But
the
the
worst use
general,
you can put a
he
man to
knows,
is to hang
I
him.
knew by his
No, there
marks
is
he
another
made.
use that a man can
Yes,
be put to
he
that is
knows
worse.
what the pints
Chapter
is.
3. The
By this
husband and
time,
father.
Master
Mrs. Shelby
George
had gone on her
arrived
visit,
at that
and
past
Eliza Rosa
which
stood in the
even a boy
veranda,
can
rather
come
dejectedly
under
looking
uncommon
after the retreating carriage.
circumstances,
When the
when
hand
he
was
really
laid on
could
her
not
shoulder,
eat another
she
morsel,
turned, and a bright smile
therefore,
lighted up her fine
he
eyes.
was at leisure to
"George,
notice the
is it
pile
you?
of woolly
How you
heads and
frightened me.
glistening eyes
Well,
which were
I am
regarding
so
their
glad you
operations
has come.
hungrily from the
Mrs. is
opposite
gone to
corner.
spend the afternoon.
And what did
So
mother
come
say?
into my little
Said
room,
George.
and we'll have the
Say,
time all to
minus
ourselves."
why?
Saying
She
this,
kinder larfed
she drew
in
him
her
into a
eyes
neat
dem
little
great
apartment
handsome
opening
eyes
on
of
the veranda,
hern.
where she
And
generally sat
says
at her
she,
sewing,
"Well,
within call of
and
her
Chloe,
mistress.
I
How
think
glad
you
I
are
am.
about in the
Minus
right
why
on.
don't you smile?
Gee,
minus
says
and
she.
look at Harry how
And
he
she
grows.
went off in
The
the
boy stood
parlor.
shyly
She
regarding
oughter
his father
cracked
through
me
his
over the
curls,
head for
holding
being
close to the
so
skirts of his
saucy.
mother's dress.
But Darsoir,
Isn't he beautiful?
he is I
said
can't
Eliza,
do nothing
lifting his
with
long
ladies
curls
in
and
the
kissing
kitchen.
him. I wish
Well,
he'd never been
you
born,
made out well
said
with
George,
that dinner. I remember
eagerly.
everybody
I wish he'd never
said
been
so,
born myself,
said George.
surprised and frightened.
And
Eliza
one eye
sat down,
behind the
leaned
dinner,
her head on her
minus
husband's
room
shoulder,
door that
and
very
burst into
day.
tears.
And did
There
I
now,
see the general
Eliza,
pass his
it's too
plate
bad for
3
me to
times
make you
for
feel
some
so.
more that
Poor
berry
girl,
pie,
said
minus
he,
and,
fondly.
says
It's
he,
too bad.
you must
Oh,
have an
how I wish
uncommon
you never
cook,
had seen me. You
Mrs.
might have
Shelby.
been happy.
Lord,
George,
I was
George,
fit to split
how
myself.
can you talk so?
And the
What dreadful
general,
thing has
he
happened,
knows what
or is
cooking
going to happen?
is,
I'm sure
said
we've
Aunt
been very
Chloe,
happy,
drawing
till lately.
herself up with
So
an
we have,
air.
dear,
Very nice
said
man.
George.
The
Then
general,
drawing his
he
child on his
comes of
knee,
one of
he
the
gazed
very
intently
fastest
on his
families
glorious
in
dark
our old
eyes,
Virginie.
and passed
He
his hand
knows
through
what's
his long
what.
curls.
Now,
Just like
as
you,
well as I
Eliza,
do the general.
and you are the
You
handsomest
see,
woman I ever
there's
saw,
pints in
and the
all
best
pies,
one I ever wish to
Maz
see.
or George. But can't
I wish I'd never
everybody
seen
knows
you,
what they
nor you
is,
me.
or as order be.
George,
But
how
the
can you?
general,
Yes,
he knows.
Eliza,
I knew
it's
by
all
his
misery,
marks
misery,
he made.
misery.
Yes,
My life
he
is
knows
bitter
what
as wormwood.
pints
The
is.
very life is
By
burning
this
out of
time,
me. I'm a
Master
poor,
George had
miserable,
arrived at
forlorn
that pass
drudge.
to which
I
even
shall
a boy
only
can
drag you
come
down with me.
under
That's
uncommon
all.
circumstances.
What's the use of our
when
trying
he
to do
really
anything,
could not eat
trying
another
to know
morsel,
anything,
and
trying to be
therefore
anything?
he was
What's
at
the use
leisure
of
to
living?
notice the
I wish
pile
I was
of woolly
dead.
heads
Oh,
and glistening
now,
eyes
dear
which
George,
were regarding
that
their
is really wicked.
operations
I know
hungrily
how
from
you
the
feel about
opposite
losing
corner.
your place in the
Here,
factory,
you most,
and you have a hard
Pete,
master.
he
But
said,
pray be patient,
breaking off
and
liberal
perhaps
bits,
something minus
and throwing
patient,
it at them.
said he,
You want some,
interrupting her.
don't you?
Haven't I been
Come.
patient?
And
Did I say a word when he
bake
came
them
and took
some
me away?
cakes.
For no
And
earthly
George
reason,
and Tom
from
moved
the
to a
place where
comfortable
everybody
seat
was
in the
kind to
chimney
me.
corner,
It paid him
while
truly
Aunt
every
Chloe,
cent of my earnings,
after
and they all
baking
say
a
I work
goodly
well.
pile of
Well,
cakes,
it is
took
dreadful,
her baby on
said
her
Eliza.
lap, and
But,
began
after all,
alternately
he
filling
is
its
your
mouth
master,
and her
you
own,
know, my
and
master,
distributing
and
to
who made
Mose
him my
and Pete,
master?
who
That's
seemed
what I
rather
think
to
of. What
prefer
right has he
eating
to
theirs
me?
as they
I'm a
rolled
man as
about
much
on
as
the
he is.
floor under
I'm
the
a better
table,
man than he is.
tickling each
I know
other,
more about
and
business than he
occasionally
does.
pulling the
I am a
baby's
better
toes.
manager than he
Oh,
is.
go
I can
long,
read better than
will
he
you?
can. I
Said
can
the
write a
mother,
better hand, and have
giving
learned it
now
all
and then
myself.
a kick,
And no
in the
thanks
kind
to
of
him, have
general
learned it in
way,
spite of him.
under the
And now
table,
what right
when
has
the
he to make
movement
a grey
became
horse of
too
me,
obstreperous.
minus to take me
Can't
from
ye be
things I can
decent
do,
when white
and do
folks
better than
comes
he
to
can,
see ye?
and put me to
Stop
work that any
ar.
horse can do?
Now,
He
will
tries
ye
to do it.
better
He
mind
says he'll bring me
yourselves,
down and
or
humble
he'll
me,
take
and
ye
he
down
puts
a
me to just
buttonhole
the
lower.
hardest,
When
meanest and
Master George
dirtiest
is
work,
gone,
on
what
purpose.
meaning was
Oh,
couched
George,
under this
George, you
terrible
frighten me.
threat?
Why,
It is
I
difficult
never
to
heard you
say,
talk so.
but
I'm
certain
afraid
it
you
is
will do
that its
something
awful
dreadful. I
indistinctness
don't
seemed
wonder at
to
your
produce
feelings
very
at
little
all.
impression
But
on the young
to be
sinners
careful,
addressed.
do
La,
for my sake
now,
for Harry.
said
I
Uncle
have been
Tom,
careful,
they are
and I
so
have been
full of
patient,
tickle all
but
the
it's
while,
growing worse and
they
worse.
can't
Flesh
behave
and blood can't
themselves.
bear it any longer.
Here the
Every
boys
chance he
emerged
can
from
get to
under the
insult and
table,
torment me,
and,
he
with
takes.
hands and
I thought I
faces
could
well
do my work
plastered
well,
with
and
molasses,
keep on quiet,
began a
and have
vigorous
some
kissing
time to
of the
read and
baby.
learn out of work
Get
hours.
along with ye,
But the more he sees
said
I
the
can do,
mother,
the more he
pushing
loads on.
away their
He
woolly
says that
heads.
though I don't
You'll
say
all
anything,
stick
he
together,
sees I've got the
and
devil
never
in me,
get clar,
and he means
if
to
ye
bring
do
it out.
that fashion.
And one of these
Go
days it
long
will
to
come
the
out in a way
spring
that
and
he
wash
won't like,
yourselves,
or am mistaken.
she said,
Oh dear,
seconding
what
her
shall we do?
exhortations
Said
by a
Eliza,
slap,
mournfully.
which resounded
It was
very
only yesterday,
formidably,
said
but
George,
which seemed
as I
only
was
to
busy
knock
loading
out so
stones
much
into
more
a cart,
laugh from the
that
young
Masr
ones,
Tom stood
as they
there,
tumbled
slashing his whip
precipitately
so near
over
the horse
each
that
other
the
out
creature
of
was
doors,
frightened.
where
I
they
asked
fairly
him to stop.
screamed with
As
merriment.
pleasant as I
Did
could, he
ye
just
ever
kept
see
right
such
on. I
aggravating,
begged him again,
young
and then he
uns?
turned on me,
Said Aunt
and
Chloe,
began striking
rather
me. I held
complacently,
his hand,
as,
and then he screamed
producing
and kicked turned and
old
ran to his
towel,
father,
kept
and
for
told him
such
that I was fighting
emergencies.
him.
She
He came
poured
in
a
a
little
rage,
water
and
out
said
of the
he'd teach
cracked
me who was
teapot
my
on it,
master.
and
He
began
tied me
rubbing
to a
off
tree,
the molasses
and cut
from the
switches for
baby's
young
face
master,
and hands,
and told him that he
and,
might whip me
having
till he was
polished
tired,
her
and he
till
did
she
do it,
shone,
if I
she
don't
set
make
her
him
down
remember
in
it
Tom's lap,
sometime.
while
And the
she
brow of
busied
the young
herself
man grew
in
dark,
clearing away
and his
supper.
eyes burned with an
The baby
expression that
employed
made his
the
young wife
intervals in
tremble.
pulling
Who
Tom's
made this
nose,
man my master?
scratching his
That's
face,
what I want to know,
and
he
burying
said.
her fat hands
Well,
in his
said
woolly hair,
Eliza,
which
mournfully,
last
I
operation
always
seemed
thought
to
that I must
afford her
obey my
special
master and
content.
mistress,
Ain't
or
she
I
a
couldn't
pert
be a
young
Christian.
un?
There is some
said
sense in it.
Tom,
In your
holding
case,
her from
they
him
have brought
to
you
take
up
a
like a child
full-length
fed
view.
you, clothed
Then,
you,
Getting up,
indulged you,
he
and
set
taught
her
you,
on his broad
so that you have
shoulder
a good education.
and began
That
capering
is some
and
reason why
dancing
they should
with her,
claim you.
while
But I have
Mazur
been kicked
George
and puffed and
snapped at
sworn
her
at,
with his
and at the
pocket
best only
handkerchief,
let alone.
and Mose
And what
and
do I
Pete,
owe?
now
If paid for
returned
all my
again,
keeping
roared
100 times
after her
over.
like
I
bears,
won't bear it.
till Aunt
No,
Chloe
I
declared
won't,
that they
he
fairly
said,
took her head
clenching
off
his hand with a
with their
fierce
noise.
frown.
As,
Eliza trembled,
according to
and
her
was
own
silent.
statement,
She had never
this
seen her
surgical
husband in this mood
operation was a
before,
matter
and
of
her
daily
gentle
occurrence
system of
in the
ethics
cabin.
seemed to bend like
The
a reed in the
declaration
surges
no
of
would
such
abated the
passions.
merriment,
You know poor
till
little
everyone
Carlo,
had
that
roared
you
and
gave me,
tumbled and
added
danced
George.
themselves
The
down to
creature
a
has
state
been
of
about all the
composure.
comfort that
Well,
it had.
now,
He has slept with
I
me
hopes
nights,
you're done,
and followed me
said
around
Aunt
days,
Chloe,
and
who
kind
had
of
been busy
looked
in
at me as
pulling
if he
out the rude
understood how
box
I
of the
felt.
trundle bed.
Well,
And
the
now,
other day I was
you
just
Mose
feeding
and
him
you
with a
Pete,
few old
get
scraps I
into
picked
far,
up by the kitchen
for we's
door,
going
and
to
Mazur
have
came
the
along,
meeting.
and
Oh,
said I was
mother,
feeding him up at his
we don't
expense,
want her.
and that
We
he
want
couldn't
to
afford
sit
to have
up to
every
meeting,
nigger keeping his
minus
dog,
meetings
and
is
ordered
so
me to tie a
curious.
stone to
We
his neck and
likes
throw him in the
him.
pond.
La,
Oh,
and
George,
Chloe,
you didn't
shove
do
it
it.
under,
Do it not
and
I, but
let
he did.
him sit
Mazur
up,
and Tom pelted
said
the poor
Mazur
drowning
George,
creature with stones.
decisively,
Poor thing.
giving a push
He
to
looked
the
at me
rude
so
machine.
mournful,
And
as if he
Chloe,
wondered why I didn't
having
save
thus
him.
saved
I had to take a
appearances,
flogging because
seemed
I
highly
wouldn't do it
delighted to
myself.
push the thing
I
under,
don't care.
saying,
Mazur will
as
find
she
out
did
that
so,
one that whipping
well,
won't
ma'am,
tame.
T
My
will
day
do
will come
him
yet,
some good.
if he don't look
The
out.
House now
What are you going to do?
itself into
Oh,
a committee
George,
of the whole,
don't do
to
anything with
consider
it.
the
If you only
accommodations
trust in
and
God,
arrangements
and
for
try
the
to do
meeting.
right,
What
He will
we's to
deliver
do
you.
for cheers.
I ain't a Christian
Now,
like you.
I declare
Eliza,
I don't know,
my heart's full of
said Aunt
bitterness.
Chloe.
I can't
As the
trust in
meeting
God.
had been held
Why
at
does he let
Uncle
things be
Tom's
so?
weekly,
Oh,
for an
George,
indefinite
we must
length
have
of
faith.
time,
Mistress
without
says
any
that when
more
all things
cheers,
go wrong to
there
us,
seemed
we
some
must believe
encouragement
that
to
God is
hope
doing
that
the
a
very
way
best.
would be
That's
discovered
easy
at
to say
present.
for people that are
Old
sitting on
Uncle
their
Peter
sofas
sung
and
both
riding
the
in their
legs
carriages.
out of that
But let
oldest cheer.
him be where I am.
Last week,
I guess it would come
suggested
some harder.
Mose,
I
you
wish I could be
belonged,
good, but my
ill-bound,
heart
you
burns,
pulled
and can't
him
be
out
reconciled.
somehow.
Anyhow,
Your
you
shines,
couldn't in my place,
said
you
Aunt
can't now.
Chloe.
If I
Well,
tell you all I've
it'll
got to
stand,
say,
if
you
it
don't know
only
the whole
keeps
yet.
jam up
What
on
can be
the
coming
wall,
now?
said
Well,
Mose.
lately
Then
Mazur has
Uncle
been
Peter
saying that
must
he was a
and
fool
sit
to
in
let
it,
me marry off the
'cause he
place,
allays
that
hitches
he
when
hates
he
Mr.
gets a
Shelby
singing.
and all his
He
tribe,
hitched pretty
because
nigh
they are
across
proud,
the room,
and hold their heads up above
other
him,
night,
and that have
said
got
Pete.
proud notions
Good
from you.
Lord,
And
get
he
him
says
in
he
it.
won't let me
Then,
come here anymore,
said Mose,
and that I shall
and
take
then
a
he'd
wife and
begin,
settle down on
come
his
saints
place.
and
At
sinners,
first he only
hear me
scolded
tell,
and grumbled
and
these
then
things,
down he'd go.
but yesterday he
Minus
told
and
me that
Mose
I should take
imitated
Mina for a
precisely
wife,
the nasal
and settle
tones of
down
the
in a
old
cabin with
man,
her, or he would
tumbling
sell
on
me
the
down
floor,
river.
to
Why, but you were
illustrate the
married to me,
supposed
by the
catastrophe.
minister, as
Come
much as
now,
if you'd been a
be
white man,
decent.
said
Can't
Eliza.
ye?
Simply,
said Aunt Chloe.
don't you know a
And
slave
you're
can't be
shamed.
married?
Mazur
There is no law in
George,
this country for that.
however,
I can
joined
hold
the
you for my
offender in
wife,
the laugh,
if he chooses
and
to part
declared
us.
decidedly
That's
that
why I
Mose
wish it
was
never
a
seen you,
buster.
why I wish it
So the
never been
maternal
born. It
admonition
would have
seemed
been better
rather
for
to
us
fail
both, it
of
would have been
effect.
better for this
Well,
poor child if
old
he had
man,
never been born.
said Aunt
All this
Chloe,
may happen to
you'll
him
have
yet.
to tote in
Oh,
them our
but
barrels.
Master is so kind.
Mother's barrels.
Yes, but
is
who
like
knows?
that our
Minus he
widders.
may die and then he
Mazur
may be
George
sold
was
to
ready.
nobody knows who.
Out.
What pleasure
Indeed,
is it
but
that he
they
is
never
handsome,
fails,
and smart,
said
and
Mose.
bright.
Aside
I tell
to
you,
Peter,
Eliza,
him sure
that
one
a sword
on,
will pierce
him
through your soul
caved in
for every
last
good
week,
and pleasant thing
said
your
Pete,
child is or
and
has.
let
It will
him
make
all
him
down
worth too
in
much
the
for
middle
you to
of the
keep.
singing.
The word
That
smote
ar
heavily
was
on
failing,
Eliza's heart.
warn't it?
The vision of the
During
traitor
this
came before
aside
her
between
eyes,
Mose and Pete,
as if
two
someone had
empty
struck her a
casks
deadly
had
blow.
been rolled
She
into the
turned pale
cabin,
and gasped
and
for
being
breath.
secured
She
from
looked
rolling
nervously out on the
by
veranda,
stones on
where
each
the boy,
side,
tired of the
boards
grave
were laid
conversation,
across them,
had
which
retired,
arrangement,
and where he was
together
riding
with the turning
triumphantly up
down
and
of
down on
certain
Mr.
tubs
Shelby's
and
walking
pails,
stick.
and the
She would have
disposing of
spoken
the
to tell
rickety
her husband her
chairs,
fears,
at last
but checked
completed the
herself.
preparation.
No, he
Mazur
has enough to
George
bear. there.
such a
Poor
beautiful
fellow,
reader.
she thought.
Now,
No,
I know he
I
will
won't
stay
tell
to
him.
read for us,
Besides,
said
it
Aunt
ain't
Chloe.
true. Mrs.
Pairs
never
like
deceives us.
he will be so much more
Eliza,
interesting.
my girl,
George
said
very
husband,
readily consented.
mournfully.
For
Bear
your
up.
boy is
Now,
always
and
ready for
goodbye,
anything
for
that
I'm
makes
going.
him of
Going.
importance.
George
The
going
room
where?
was soon
To
filled
Canada,
with a
said
motley
he,
assemblage
straightening
from
himself
the
up.
old
And when him
gray-headed
there,
patriarch
he'll
of
bite you.
Haiti. To
That's
the
all the
young
hope
girl
that's
and
left
lad
us.
of 15,
You have a kind
a
master
little harmless
that won't
gossip
refuse
ensued
to
on
sell you.
various
He'll
themes,
buy you and the boy
such
God
as
helping
where
me.
old Aunt
I
Sally
will.
got her new red
Dreadful
handkerchief,
if you should be
and
taken.
how Mrs.
I
was
won't be
going
taken.
to give Lizzie
Eliza,
that spotted
he'll die
muslin
first.
gown
He'll be
when
free,
she got
or
her
he'll
new
die.
barge
You
made
won't
up,
kill
and
yourself.
how Maz
No
or
need of
Shelby
that.
was
They
thinking
will
of
kill
buying
me.
a new
Fast
sorrel
enough.
colt
They never will
that
get
was
me down
going
the
to
river
prove
alive.
an addition
Oh,
to the glories
George,
of the place.
for my sake,
A few
do
of
be
the
careful.
worshippers
Don't
belonged
do
to
anything wicked.
families hard
Don't
by,
lay hands
who
on
had
yourself
got permission
or
to
anybody
attend,
else.
and who
You are
brought in
tempted too
various
much too
choice
much.
scraps
But
of
don't go, you
information
must but go
about the
carefully,
sayings and
prudently.
doings at the
Pray God
house
to
and
help
on the
you.
place,
Well,
which
then,
circulated as
Eliza,
freely
hear
as
my
the
plan.
same sort of
Masver
small
took it into his
change
head
does
to
in
send
higher
me right by
circles.
here, with a
After a
note to
while
Mr.
the
Sims,
singing
that
commenced,
lives a
to
mile
the
past.
evident
I
delight of
believe he
all
expected
present.
I should come
Not
here to
even
tell you
all
what
the
I have.
disadvantage
It would
of
please
nasal
him,
intonation
if he
could
thought it would
prevent the
aggravate
effect of the
Shelby's
naturally
thoughts,
fine
as he
voices
calls
in airs
him.
at once
Him going
wild
home
and
quite
spirited.
resigned.
The
You
words
understand,
were
as
sometimes
if all
the
was
well-known
over.
and
I've
common
got some
hymns sung in the
preparations made,
churches
and there are
about,
those that will
and
help me.
sometimes of a
And, in
wilder,
the course of a
more
week or so,
indefinite
I
character,
shall be among the
picked
missing.
up at camp
Someday.
meetings.
Pray for
The
me,
chorus of one
Eliza.
of them,
Perhaps
which
the good
ran
Lord
as
will hear you.
follows,
Oh,
was sung
pray
with
yourself,
great energy and
George,
unction.
and go
Minus
trusting
die
in
on
him.
the field
Then
of
you won't
battle,
do anything
die
wicked.
on the field
Well,
of battle.
now,
Glory
goodbye,
in my
said
soul.
George,
Another
holding
special
Eliza's
favorite
hands,
had oft
and gazing
repeated the
into her
words
eyes.
Minaso.
Without
I'm
moving,
going to
they
glory,
stood
won't you
silent.
come
Then
along
there
with
were
me?
last words,
Don't you
and
see
sobs,
the angels
and Peter
beckoning,
weeping such
and
parting as
calling
those
me
may make
away?
whose hope to
Don't
meet
you
again is as
see
the
the golden
spider's web
city
and the
and
husband
the
and wife were
everlasting
parted.
day? There were others, which
Chapter
made
4.
incessant
An
mention
evening
of
in
Uncle
Jordan's
Tom's
banks.
cabin, and
The
Canaan's
cabin
fields
of Uncle Tom
was
was
a
a New
small
Jerusalem
log building for the
close
Negro
adjoining
adjoining to the house,
impassioned and
as the
imaginative,
Negro par excellence
always
designates
attaches
his
his
master's
hymns
dwelling.
and
Expressions in front
of a
it had
vivid
a
and
neat
pictorial
garden patch,
nature,
where,
and,
every
as they
summer,
sung,
strawberries,
laughed,
raspberries,
and some cried,
and a
and
variety
some
of
clapped
fruits and
hands,
vegetables,
or shook hands
flourished under
rejoicingly
careful
with
tending.
each other.
The whole
As if
front
they
of
had
it was
fairly
covered
gained
by
the
a
other
large
side of
scarlet
the river.
begonia and
Various
a native
multiflorous
rose, or
which,
relations
and
of
experience
and interlacing,
followed,
left
and
scarce a
intermingled
vestige
with the
of the rough
singing.
logs
One
to be
old
seen.
gray-headed
Here,
woman, also,
long past
in
work,
summer,
but much
various
revered
brilliant
as a sort of
annuals,
chronicle of
such
the
as
past,
marigolds,
rose,
and
petunias,
leaning on her
for
staff,
oaklocks, said
found
Minus
an
an
indulgent
corner in which
well,
to unfold
am
their
mighty glad
splendors,
to hear ye
and
all
the delight
see
and
ye
pride
all
of one's close heart. 'Cause I
Let
don't
us know
enter
when
the
it will be
dwelling
gone
to
the
glory,
evening meal
but
at
if
the
the
house
house
is
ready,
over.
Chillin and Chloe,
Airs like
who
it
presided
my
over
little
its
bundle all
preparation
tied
as
up,
head cook,
and my bonnet
has
on,
left to
just
inferior
awaiting
officers in the
for
kitchen
the
the
stage
business
to
of
come
clearing
along
away
and
and
take me
washing
home.
dishes, and come
Sometimes,
out into her
in the
own
night,
snug territories.
I hear the
to get
wheels
her old
a-rattling,
man's supper,
and am looking,
therefore, out all the
doubt
time
not
that it is
now
her you see
you
by the
just
fire,
be
ready to presiding
for
with
I tell
anxious
ye all,
interest over
Chillin,
certain frizzling
she said,
items,
striking
in a
her
stewpan,
staff hard on
and
the
anon
floor.
with great
That
consideration
is a mighty
lifting the
thing.
cover of a
It's
baked
a mighty
kettle,
thing.
from whence
Chillin,
steam
you don't know
forth
nothing
indubitable
about it. It's
intimations
wonderful.
of something
And
good.
the old
creature
around,
sat down,
black,
with shining
streaming
face
tears,
is hers, as wholly
so
overcome,
glossy
as to
while
suggest
the whole
the idea that
struck
she
up
might have been washed
Canaan,
over with
bright
white
Canaan,
Canaans,
inbound
like
for
the
the
land
land
of her
of
own
Canaan.
tea rusks.
Masr
Her
George,
whole plump
by
countenance
request,
beams with
read the last
satisfaction
chapters
and
of
contentment
Revelation,
from under her
often
well starched
interrupted by
such
such
exclamations
bearing on
as
it.
the sakes
Now,
however,
only
if
hear
we
that,
must confess
just
it, think on
a little of
that
tea
tinge of
is all that
self-consciousness
common,
which becomes
sure
the
enough.
first cook of
George,
the neighborhood, who was
as
a
and
bright
Chloe
boy, was universally
well
trained
trained
and
in religious
acknowledged
things
to
by
be
his
mother.
a cook.
She
Finding
certainly was
himself
an
in the
object
very
of
bone
general
and admiration
admiration of her soul,
through
not
inexpectations
a chicken or
of his
turkey
own.
or duck in the
From
barnyard
time to
but
time,
looked grave when
with
they saw her
seriousness
approaching,
and gravity,
seemed evidently
for
to
which
be
he was
admired
on
by
their
the young
latter
and
end,
blessed by
and
the
certain
old.
it was that
and
she
it was
was always
agreed
meditating
on all
on
hands
pressing
that a
stuff in
minister couldn't lay it off better than he did, calculated to inspire really in any reflecting foul
Uncle
living.
Tom
was a sort of patriarch in religious varieties of in the neighborhood, having naturally and other organization in which the morale was strongly predominant, mystery to all, together with a greater breadth and cultivation of mind than obtained among his companions, pride and he was looked up to as great, would narrate the fruitless effort of minister among among
another
them,
of her
and the
compeers had
simple,
made to
hearty,
attain to her
sincere
elevation.
style of
The
his
arrival of
exhortations
company
might
have
have edified
even
the arranging of dinners
persons,
and suppers,
but it was
in
in
style
prayer that he
especially
awoke all the
excelled.
energies of her
Nothing
soul,
could exceed
and
the
no
touching
sight was more
simplicity
welcome to
the
her than the
childlike
pile of
earnestness
traveling
of
trunks
his prayer,
launched on the
enriched
veranda,
with the
for
language
then
of
she
Scripture,
foresaw fresh
which
efforts
seemed
and
so
fresh
entirely
triumphs
to have wrought itself
just
into
at
his
present,
being.
as to
However,
have become a part
Chloe
of
is
himself,
looking into the bay and
to
pen,
drop from
in
his
which
lips
congenial
unconsciously,
operation we
in
shall
the
leave her
language
till
of a
we
pious
finish
old
our
negro
picture of the
He
cottage.
prayed right
In one
up,
corner of
and
it
so
stood
much
a bed,
did his prayer
covered
always
neatly
work
with a
on the
snowy
devotional
spread,
feelings
and
of
by
his
the side of
audiences,
it was a piece
that
of
there seemed
carpeting,
often a
of
danger
some
that it would
considerable
be
size.
lost altogether
On this
in the
piece of
abundance
carpeting and
responsibility
Chloe took her
out
stand
everywhere
as
around
being
him.
decidedly
While
in the
this
upper
scene
walks
was
of
passing
life,
in the cabin
and
of
it
the
and
man,
the bed by
which
which
it
lay,
might otherwise
and
passed
the whole
in the
corner
halls of the
in
master,
fact,
were
the trader
treated with
and Mr.
distinguished
Shelby were seated
consideration,
together in
and
the
made
dining room
so
before
far
named,
as possible,
at a table
sacred
covered
with
from
papers
papers
and
and
writing
writings and
utensils.
desecrations of
Mr.
little
Shelby
folks.
was busy
In
in
fact,
counting some
that
bundles of
corner
bills,
was the drawing room
which,
of the
as they were
establishment.
counted,
In the
he
other
pushed
corner
over
was
to
a
the
bed
trader,
of much humbler
who counted them
pretensions,
likewise,
and evidently
all
designed
fair,
for use.
said the trader.
The wall over
And
the
now for
fireplace
signing
was
these
adorned
here,
with some
Mr.
very brilliant
Shelby
scriptural
hastily drew the
prints,
bills of
and a
sale
portrait
towards
of
him,
General
and
Washington,
signed them,
drawn
like
like
a man
in
that
a manner
hurries
which
over
would
some
certainly
disagreeable
have
business,
astonished that hero,
and then pushed
if ever
them
he
over with
happened
the
to
money,
meet with its
Haley
like.
produced
On a rough
from a
bench in the
well-worn
corner,
valise
a couple
a
of woolly-headed boys,
which, with
after looking
black
over
eyes
it a moment,
and fat shining
he handed
cheeks,
to Mr.
were
Shelby,
busy in superintending
who took it with
the
a
first
gesture
walking
of suppressed
operations of
eagerness.
the baby
Wall,
which,
now,
as is
the
usually
thing's
the
done,
case,
said the
consisted
trader,
in getting up
on its feet.
It's done, balancing
said
a moment,
Mr. Shelby,
and then
in
tumbling
amusing
down
tone,
each successive
and
failure
fetching
being
a long
violently
breath.
cheered.
He
As he
repeated,
something decidedly
"It's
clever.
You don't
The table,
seem to feel
somewhat
much rheumatic
with
in
it,
its limbs.
appears to me,"
was drawn out
said
in
the
front
trader,
of the fire,
Haley,
and covered
said
with
Mr.
a cloth,
Shelby. I
displaying
hope you'll
cups and
remember
saucers
that
of
you
a decidedly brilliant
on your
pattern.
honor, with
You
other
wouldn't sell
symptoms
Tom,
of an approaching
without
meal.
knowing what
At
sort
this
of table
table
was
he's seated
going
Uncle
into.
Tom.
Why, Mr.
You've
Shelby's
just done
best
it,
hand,
sir,
said
who,
the trader,
as he is to be the hero of our story,
You well know
we must
oblige
oblige
me,
for our
said
readers.
Shelby.
He was a
Haughtily.
large,
Wall,
broad-chested,
powerfully made
man,
oblige
of
me,
a full glossy
too,
black,
said the
and
trader,
a face
whose
howsoever
truly
African
if you the
features
very
were
best I
characterized
can
by
get
an
an
expression
on
of
a
grave
grave
and steady
as
good
to my
sense.
treating,
United
on
with
him
much
much kindliness
you needn't
and
be a grain
benevolence.
affair.
There was
If
something
there's
about
anything
his whole
that I
air
thank the Lord
self-respecting
for,
and
it is
dignified,
that him never
yet
nowadays
united with
will,
a confiding
after
and
the
humble
expositions
simplicity,
which the
he was
trader
very
had
busily
previously
intent
given
at
of
this
this moment
moment
on the slate
principles.
lying before
Mr.
him,
Shelby
on
did
which
not
he
feel
was carefully
particularly
and slowly
reassured by
endeavoring
these
to accomplish a
declarations,
copy of
but,
some letters,
as they were the
in
best
which
comfort the
operation he
case
was
admitted of,
overlooked by young
he
Master
allowed the trader
George,
to depart
a
in
smart,
silence,
bright boy
and
of
bethird
15,
himself to a
who
solitary
appeared fully
cigar.
to realize the dignity of his position as instructor.
Not that way, Uncle Tom,
Not that way, said he, briskly, as Uncle Tom laboriously brought up the tail of his G the wrong side out. That makes a Q, you see. La, sakes, now, does it? Said Uncle Tom, looking with a respectful, admiring air, as his young teacher flishingly scrawled sk and sk innumerable for his edification, and then, taking the pencil in his big, heavy fingers, he patiently recommenced. How easy white folks all use does things, said Aunt Chloe, pausing while she was greasing a griddle with a scrap of bacon on her fork, and regarding young Master George with pride. The way he can write, now, and read, too, and then to come out here evenings and read his lessons to us, it's mighty interesting. But, Aunt Chloe, I'm getting mighty hungry, said George. Isn't that cake in the skillet almost done? Most done, Master George, said Aunt Chloe, lifting the lid and peeping in minus browning beautiful a real lovely brown. Ah, let me alone for dat. Mrs. let Sally try to make some cake, other day, just to larn her, she said. Oh, go away, Mrs., said I, it really hurts my feelings. Now, to see good victuals spilt that our way. Cake ris all to one side, no shape at all, no more than my shoe. Go away. And with this final expression of contempt for Sally's greenness, Aunt Chloe whipped the cover off the bake kettle, and disclosed to view a neatly baked pound cake, of which no city confectioner need to have been ashamed. This being evidently the central point of the entertainment, Aunt Chloe began now to bustle about earnestly in the supper department. "Here you, Mose and Pete, get out the way, you niggers. Get away, Polly, honey mammy'll give her baby some fin, by and by. Now, Mas'r George, you just take off dem books, and set down now with my old man, and I'll take up de sausages, and have de first griddle full of cakes on your plates in less than no time." "They wanted me to come to supper in the house," said George, "but I knew what was what too well for that, Aunt Chloe." So you did, honey," said Aunt Chloe, heaping the smoking batter cakes on his plate. "You knowed your old auntie'd keep the best for you. Oh, let you alone for dat. And, with that, Auntie gave George a nudge with her finger, designed to be immensely facetious, and turned again to her griddle with great briskness. "Now for the cake," said Mas'r George, when the activity of the griddle department had somewhat subsided, and, with that, the youngster flourished a large knife over the article in question. "La bless you, Mas'r George," said Aunt Chloe, with earnestness, catching his arm. "You wouldn't be for cuttin', it would dat our great heavy knife. Smash all down, spile all de pretty rise of it. Here, I've got a thin old knife. I keeps sharp a purpose. Dar now, see, comes apart light as a feather. Now eat away, you won't get anything to beat dat ar." "Tom Lincoln says," said George, speaking with his mouth full, "that there Ginny is a better cook than you. Dem Lincolns ain't much count." "No way," said Aunt Chloe, contemptuously. "I mean, set alongside our folks. They, s, 'spectable folks enough in a kinder plain way, but, as to gettin' up anything in style, they don't begin to have a notion on t," said Mas'r Lincoln. "Now, alongside Mas'r Shelby. Good lor, and Mrs. Lincoln, can she kinder sweep it into a room like my missus, so kinder splendid, yer know. Oh, go way, don't tell me nothin' of dem Lincolns." Minus and Aunt Chloe tossed her head as one who hoped she did know something of the world. "Well, though, I've heard you say," said George, "that Ginny was a pretty fair cook." "So I did," said Aunt Chloe, "minus I may say dat. Good, plain, common cookin', Ginny'll do make a good pone o' bread, bile her taters, far her corn cakes isn't extra. Not extra now, Ginny's corn cakes isn't. But then these far, but, lor, come to de higher branches, and what can she do? Why, she makes pies, sartin she does. But what kinder crust? Can she make your real flecky paste, as melts in your mouth, and lies all up like a puff? Now, I went over thar when Miss Mary was gwine to be married, and Ginny she just showed me de weddin' pies. Ginny and I is good friends, ye know. I never said nothin', but go long, Mas'r George. Why, I shouldn't sleep a wink for a week, if I had a batch of pies like dem are. Why, dey want no count t all." "I suppose Ginny thought they were ever so nice," said George. "Thought so, minus didn't she? Thar she was, showing 'em, as innocent, ye see. It's just here, Ginny don't know. Lor, the family and nothing. She can't be 'spected to know. 'Tain't no fault o' him. Ah, Mas'r George, you doesn't know half your privileges in your family and bringin' up." Here Aunt Chloe sighed, and rolled up her eyes with emotion. "I'm sure, Aunt Chloe. I understand my pie and pudding privileges," said George. "Ask Tom Lincoln if I don't crow over him every time I meet him." Aunt Chloe sat back in her chair and indulged in a hearty guffaw of laughter at this witticism of young Mozart's, laughing till the tears rolled down her black, shining cheeks, and varying the exercise with playfully slapping and poking Mazur Georgie, and telling him to go away, and that he was a case that he was fit to kill her, and that he sartin would kill her one of these days, and, between each of these sanguinary predictions, going off into a laugh, each longer and stronger than the other, till George really began to think that he was a very dangerously witty fellow, and that it became him to be careful how he talked as funny as he could. "And so ye telled Tom, did ye? Oh lor, what young uns will be up ter?" Ye crowed over Tom. "Oh lor, Mazur George, if ye wouldn't make a hornbug laugh." "Yes," said George. "I says to him, Tom, you ought to see some of Aunt Chloe's pies. They're the right sort, says I." "Pity, now, Tom couldn't," said Aunt Chloe, on whose benevolent heart the idea of Tom's benighted condition seemed to make a strong impression. "Ye oughter just ask him here to dinner, some o' these times, Mazur George," she added. "It would look quite pretty of ye. Ye know, Mazur George, ye oughtn't feel, bove nobody, on count yer privileges, 'cause all our privileges is gin to us. We ought allays to 'member that," said Aunt Chloe, looking quite serious. "Well, I mean to ask Tom here, some day next week," said George, "and you do your prettiest, Aunt Chloe, and we'll make him stare. Won't we make him eat so he won't get over it for a fortnight?" Yes, sartin," said Aunt Chloe, delighted. "You'll see. Lor, to think of some of our dinners. Yer mind dat our great chicken pie I made when we guv de dinner to General Knox? I and Missus, we come pretty near quarreling about dat our crust. What does get into ladies sometimes, I don't know, but sometimes, when a body has de heaviest kind o' 'sponsibility on him, as ye may say, and is all kinder serious and taken up, dey takes dat our time to be hangin' round and kinder interferin'. Now, Missus, she wanted me to do dis way, and she wanted me to do dat way, and, finally, I got kinder sarsy, and, says I, now, Missus, do just look at dem beautiful white hands o' yourn with long fingers, and all a sparkling with rings, like my white lilies when de dew s on 'em, and look at my great black stumpin' hands." "And what did mother say?" said George. "Say, minus why, she kinder larfed in her eyes, dem great handsome eyes o' hern, and, says she, 'Well, Aunt Chloe, I think you are about in the right on, says she, and she went off in de parlor. She oughter cracked me over de head for bein' so sarsy, but dar's war, is I can't do nothin' with ladies in de kitchen." "Well, you made out well with that dinner, I remember everybody said so," said George. "Didn't I? And wa'n't I behind de dinnin', minus room door dat bury day, and didn't I see de general pass his plate 3 times for some more dat bury pie, minus and, says he, 'You must have an uncommon cook, Mrs. Shelby.' Lor, I was fit to split myself. And de general, he knows what cookin' is," said Aunt Chloe, drawing herself up with an air. "Bury nice man, de general. He comes of one of de bury fustest families in old Virginie. He knows what's what, now, as well as I do, de general. Ye see, there's pints in all pies, Mazur George. But tant everybody knows what they is. Or as order be. But the general, he knows. I knew by his marks he made. Yes, he knows what de pints is. By this time, Master George had arrived at that pass to which even a boy can come, under uncommon circumstances, when he really could not eat another morsel, and, therefore, he was at leisure to notice the pile of woolly heads and glistening eyes which were regarding their operations hungrily from the opposite corner. "And what did mother say?" said George. "Say, minus why, she kinder larfed in her eyes dem great handsome eyes o' hern, and, says she, well, and Chloe, I think you are about in the right on, says she, and she went off in de parlor. She outer cracked me over de head for bein' so sarcy, but dar's war, is I can't do nothin' with ladies in de kitchen." "Well, you made out well with that dinner, I remember everybody said so," said George. "Didn't I? And want I behind de dinin', minus room door dat bury day, and didn't I see de general pass his plate 3 times for some more dat bury pie? Minus and, says he, you must have an uncommon cook, Mrs. Shelby. Lor, I was fit to split myself. And de general, he knows what cookin' is," said Aunt Chloe, drawing herself up with an air. "Bury nice man, de general. He comes of one of de bury fustest families in old Virginie. He knows what's what, now, as well as I do, de general. Ye see, there's pints in all pies, Mazur George. But tant everybody knows what they is, or as order be. But the general, he knows. I knew by his marks he made. Yes, he knows what de pints is." By this time, Master George had arrived at that pass to which even a boy can come, under uncommon circumstances, when he really could not eat another morsel, and, therefore, he was at leisure to notice the pile of woolly heads and glistening eyes which were regarding their operations hungrily from the opposite corner. "Here, you mos, Pete," he said, breaking off liberal bits, and throwing it at them. "You want some, don't you? Come, and Chloe, bake them some cakes." And George and Tom moved to a comfortable seat in the chimney corner, while Aunt Chloe, after baking a goodly pile of cakes, took her baby on her lap, and began alternately filling its mouth and her own, and distributing to Mose and Pete, who seemed rather to prefer eating theirs as they rolled about on the floor under the table, tickling each other, and occasionally pulling the baby's toes. "Oh, go long, will ye?" said the mother, giving now and then a kick, in a kind of general way, under the table, when the movement became too obstreperous. "Can't ye be decent when white folks comes to see ye? Stop dat now, will ye? Better mind yourselves, or I'll take ye down a buttonhole lower, when Mazur George is gone." What meaning was couched under this terrible threat, it is difficult to say, but certain it is that its awful indistinctness seemed to produce very little impression on the young sinners addressed. "La, now," said Uncle Tom, "they are so full of tickle all the while, they can't behave themselves." Here the boys emerged from under the table, and, with hands and faces well plastered with molasses, began a vigorous kissing of the baby. "Get along, would ye?" said the mother, pushing away their woolly heads. "Ye'll all stick together, and never get clar, if ye do dat fashion. Go long to de spring and wash yourselves," she said, seconding her exhortations by a slap, which resounded very formidably, but which seemed only to knock out so much more laugh from the young ones, as they tumbled precipitately over each other out of doors, where they fairly screamed with merriment. "Did ye ever see such aggravatin', young "Uns," said Aunt Chloe, rather complacently, as, producing an old towel, kept for such emergencies, she poured a little water out of the cracked teapot on it, and began rubbing off the molasses from the baby's face and hands, and, having polished her till she shone, she set her down in Tom's lap, while she busied herself in clearing away supper. The baby employed the intervals in pulling Tom's nose, scratching his face, and burying her fat hands in his woolly hair, which last operation seemed to afford her special content. "Ain't she a pert young un?" said Tom, holding her from him to take a full-length view. Then, getting up, he set her on his broad shoulder, and began capering and dancing with her, while Master George snapped at her with his pocket handkerchief, and Mose and Pete, now returned again, roared after her like bears, till Aunt Chloe declared that they fairly took her head off with their noise. As, according to her own statement, this surgical operation was a matter of daily occurrence in the cabin, the declaration no whit abated the merriment, till everyone had roared and tumbled and danced themselves down to a state of composure. "Well, now, I hopes you're done," said Aunt Chloe, who had been busy in pulling out a rude box of a trundle bed. "And now, you Mose and you Pete, get into thar, for we's goin' to have the meetin'." "Oh, mother, we don't want her. We wants to sit up to meetin'. Minus meetin's is so curious. We likes him." "La, Aunt Chloe, shove it under, and let him sit up," said Master George, decisively, giving a push to the rude machine. Aunt Chloe, having thus saved appearances, seemed highly delighted to push the thing under, saying, as she did so, "Well, Meb, 't will do him some good." The House now resolved itself into a committee of the whole, to consider the accommodations and arrangements for the meeting. "What we's to do for cheers, now, I declare I don't know," said Aunt Chloe. As the meeting had been held at Uncle Tom's weekly, for an indefinite length of time, without any more cheers, there seemed some encouragement to hope that a way would be discovered at present. Old Uncle Peter sung both de legs out of dat oldest cheer last week, suggested Mose. "You go long, Ilbown, you pulled him out some o' your shines," said Aunt Chloe. "Well, it'll stand, if it only keeps jam up agin de wall," said Mose. "Den Uncle Peter mustn't sit in it, 'cause he allays hitches when he gets a singing. He hitched pretty nigh across de room, other night," said Pete. "Good lor, get him in it, then," said Mose, and then he'd begin, "Come saints and sinners, hear me tell," and then down he'd go. Minus and Mose imitated precisely the nasal tones of the old man, tumbling on the floor, to illustrate the supposed catastrophe. "Come now, be decent, can't ye?" said Aunt Chloe, "and you're shamed." Master George, however, joined the offender in the laugh, and declared decidedly that Mose was a buster. So the maternal admonition seemed rather to fail of effect. "Well, old man," said Aunt Chloe, "you'll have to tote in them ar barrels. Mother's barrels is like dat ar widders." Master George was reading, "'Bout, in de good book dey never fails," said Mose, aside to Peter. "I'm sure one on 'em caved in last week," said Pete, "and let 'em all down in de middle of de singin'. Dat ar was failin', warn't it?" During this aside between Mose and Pete, 2 empty casks had been rolled into the cabin, and being secured from rolling, by stones on each side, boards were laid across them. Which arrangement, together with the turning down of certain tubs and pails, and the disposing of the rickety chairs, at last completed the preparation. Mazur George is such a beautiful reader. Now, I know he'll stay to read for us, said Aunt Chloe. Pairs like tea will be so much more interesting. George very readily consented, for your boy is always ready for anything that makes him of importance. The room was soon filled with a motley assemblage, from the old grey-headed patriarch of 80, to the young girl and lad of 15. A little harmless gossip ensued on various themes, such as where old Aunt Sally got her new red headkerchief, and how Mrs. was going to give Lizzie that spotted muslin gown, when she got her new barge made up, and how Mazur Shelby was thinking of buying a new sorrel colt that was going to prove an addition to the glories of the place. A few of the worshippers belonged to families hard by, who had got permission to attend, and who brought in various choice scraps of information about the sayings and doings at the house and on the place, which circulated as freely as the same sort of small change does in higher circles. After a while the singing commenced, to the evident delight of all present. Not even all the disadvantage of nasal intonation could prevent the effect of the naturally fine voices, in airs at once wild and spirited. The words were sometimes the well-known and common hymns sung in the churches about, and sometimes of a wilder, more indefinite character, picked up at camp meetings. The chorus of one of them, which ran as follows, was sung with great energy and unction. Die on the field of battle, die on the field of battle, glory in my soul. Another special favorite had oft repeated the words "Oh, I'm going to glory, won't you come along with me? Don't you see the angels beckoning, and a-calling me away? Don't you see the golden city and the everlasting day?" There were others, which made incessant mention of Jordan's banks, and Canaan's fields, and the New Jerusalem, for the Negro mind, impassioned and imaginative, always attaches itself to hymns and expressions of a vivid and pictorial nature, and, as they sung, some laughed, and some cried, and some clapped hands, or shook hands rejoicingly with each other, as if they had fairly gained the other side of the river. Various exhortations, or relations of experience, followed, and intermingled with the singing. One old gray-headed woman, long past work, but much revered as a sort of chronicle of the past, rose, and leaning on her staff, said "Well, chillin'. Well, I'm mighty glad to hear ye all and see ye all once more, 'cause I don't know when I'll be gone to glory, but if done got ready, chillin', pairs like it got my little bundle all tied up, and my bonnet on, jest a-waitin' for the stage to come along and take me home. Sometimes, in the night, I think I hear the wheels a-rattlin', and I'm lookin' out all the time. Now, you jest be ready to, for I tell ye all, chillin'," she said, striking her staff hard on the floor, "dat our glory is a mighty thing. It's a mighty thing. Chillin', you dunno nothing about it, it's wonderful." And the old creature sat down, with streaming tears, as wholly overcome, while the whole circle struck up "O Canaan, bright Canaan, I'm bound for the land of Canaan." Mazur George, by request, read the last chapters of Revelation, often interrupted by such exclamations as "the sakes now, only hear that. Just think on, t. Is all that a comin', sure enough." George, who was a bright boy, and well trained in religious things by his mother, finding himself an object of general admiration, threw in expositions of his own, from time to time, with a commendable seriousness and gravity, for which he was admired by the young and blessed by the old, and it was agreed, on all hands, that a minister couldn't lay it off better than he did. That, he was really amazing.
Uncle Tom was a sort of patriarch in religious matters in the neighborhood, having, naturally, an organization in which the morale was strongly predominant, together with a greater breadth and cultivation of mind than obtained among his companions. He was looked up to with great respect, as a sort of minister among them, and the simple, hearty, sincere style of his exhortations might have edified even better educated persons. But it was in prayer that he especially excelled. Nothing could exceed the touching simplicity, the childlike earnestness, of his prayer, enriched with the language of Scripture, which seemed so entirely to have wrought itself into his being, as to have become a part of himself, and to drop from his lips unconsciously. In the language of a pious old Negro, he prayed right up. And so much did his prayer always work on the devotional feelings of his audiences, that there seemed often a danger that it would be lost altogether in the abundance of the responses which broke out everywhere around him. While this scene was passing in the cabin of the man, one quite otherwise passed in the halls of the master. The trader and Mr. Shelby were seated together in the dining room aforenamed, at a table covered with papers and writing utensils. Mr. Shelby was busy in counting some bundles of bills, which, as they were counted, he pushed over to the trader, who counted them likewise. "All fair," said the trader, "and now for signing these here." Mr. Shelby hastily drew the bills of sale towards him, and signed them, like a man that hurries over some disagreeable business, and then pushed them over with the money. Haley produced, from a well-worn valise, a parchment, which, after looking over it a moment, he handed to Mr. Shelby, who took it with a gesture of suppressed eagerness. "Wall, now, the thing's done," said the trader, getting up. "It's done," said Mr. Shelby, in a musing tone, and, fetching a long breath, he repeated, "It's done. Yer don't seem to feel much pleased with it, 'pears to me," said the trader. "Haley," said Mr. Shelby, "I hope you'll remember that you promised, on your honor, you wouldn't sell Tom, without knowing what sort of hands he's going into." "Why, you've just done it, sir," said the trader. "Circumstances, you well know, obliged me," said Shelby, haughtily. "Wall, you know, they may 'blige me, too," said the trader. "Howsomever, I'll do the very best I can in gettin' Tom a good berth. As to my treatin' on him bad, you needn't be a grain afeard. If there's anything that I thank the Lord for, it is that 'im never noways cruel." After the expositions which the trader had previously given of his humane principles, Mr. Shelby did not feel particularly reassured by these declarations, but, as they were the best comfort the case admitted of, he allowed the trader to depart in silence, and betook himself to a solitary cigar.